Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. On Monday, Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski called for an urgent meeting of the EU-Baltic states to discuss European security and the ongoing war in Ukraine. This follows on from the London meeting of the leaders of the UK, France, Germany and Ukraine. Alongside this, Brussels remains busy as ever, having signed off on a new migration and asylum policy in recognition that reforms and change are urgent. But Poland will be exempt from mandatory migration relocation requirements. We are joined now by Piotr Kaczyński, EU Institutional Issues Lecturer at the European Institute of Public Administration, to tell us about the significance of these European developments and also where Poland stands in all of this. Good morning and thanks so much for being with us.
Good morning.
So let's start with the London summit. What are the chances that Ukraine gives up land to Russia? Because that was the underlying premise of the meeting of the allied leaders with Volodymyr Zelensky in London on Monday. How do you read the meeting that took place in London, which included Starmer, Macron and Merz? And why wasn't Poland invited?
Look, the issue whether Poland's invited or not, it's an issue for Poland, not for the war and for Ukraine. So, of course, it would be better for Poland to be involved in those matters. But I would personally just blame the fact that Poland is internally divided between the presidency and the government on the matter on how to deal with the issue of the war next to Polish border. Whether the Europeans will be successful, well, this is an attempt to counterbalance all those massive attacks that were coming from across the big pond, as they say in the UK, from the US, where the Americans, as if they simply got on the wrong foot for the last 10 days. First, they started with this mal-thought 28 points plan. Then they finished with their national security agenda that is effectively not a security agenda but anti-European slur, and Europeans try to find their ways around it.
Well, it has to be said that Zelensky himself was a little bit surprised that Poland wasn't there, because he even mentioned that to a group of journalists that he spoke to later in the day. But I want to move on to Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski's move and his urgent call for the Baltic Sea States Council. Why now? What triggered it? And what are the main points on his agenda? How do the Baltic states perceive the ongoing tensions and the risks in relation to Russia?
Look, for all the Baltic states, so it's not about only the term three Baltic nations, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, but all the countries around the Baltic, that includes Poland, Finland, Sweden, Denmark and Germany, that of course there's also Russia there, are extremely worried. If anybody in Europe is worried about escalating the war in Eastern Europe, are the nations around the Baltic Sea. Just a point of reminder that it was Finland and Sweden who joined NATO because of the war in Ukraine in 2022, and then they joined in subsequent years. So yes, those meetings with the Baltics at the ministerial level for Foreign Minister Sikorski is a coordination mechanism and data sharing between the nations that are most exposed to the threat from Russia. Look, there are migratory pressures, there are hybrid wars, there are drone threats coming, territorial threats coming from the Russian Federation against NATO members, against EU members, and those members have to simply coordinate.
Now let's turn to Brussels, busy as ever. How does Brussels view the new U.S. national security strategy?
The U.S. national security strategy, that is the document that a lot of people simply don't know how to react to. One can be either extremely critical or say nothing. There's nothing in between, or no third option. If you are a positive if you have a positive position on this document and you are European, then you're a traitor to the European cause. The European cause being peace in Europe. Because what this national security document, I rephrase, I'm not going to call it strategy, is saying effectively is that the 80 years of crafted transatlantic relations is not worth defending anymore, because Americans are going somewhere, probably to the space, and Europeans are not exactly willing to follow them there. America says that Europe is wrong and Europe needs to change. Well, we can say exactly the same thing about America, that America is wrong and America has to change. But at the end of the day, we need to get together to face the threats that are facing the entire Western world. But after this document, we can simply ask the question, does the West still exist?
So what is Europe's reaction to the new direction of US foreign policy? How does this change European priorities regarding US strategy?
Look, EU is a small, not a small but a slow machine and a slow machinery. So EU is not going to react on the spot. But also, this American policy is not exactly new. We saw J.D. Vance campaigning in the German elections for far right earlier this year, and this is simply a follow-up. That's it. The Americans are holding ground. They are saying that far-right politicians, extreme far-right politicians in Europe are okay and everybody else is not okay. So they are positioning themselves as allies of far-right. And these people may be extreme or far extreme. We are simply right now in Europe considering how many words of far are we adding to new waves of extreme politicians on the right side, with politicians like Meloni or Polish Law and Justice no longer being far right, because so many people are to the right flank of those politicians.
Now, I wanted to move on to matters that are happening on the continent. We have leaders of 7 EU countries issuing a joint letter to the European Council President Antonio Costa and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, calling for the quick adoption of an EU support mechanism for Ukraine. Now, this mechanism is to be based on a so-called reparations loan financed using Russian frozen assets in EU countries. What do you think is the likelihood that there will be any tangible progress in this matter?
You never know. We never know. The pressure is mounting on the Belgian Prime Minister to give in. It has been the Belgian Prime Minister holding back, but the Commission is looking for ways around the Belgian veto, trying to have an instrument that would be acceptable by majority of member states, and then using a procedure that would allow for a majority vote on the matter. Because, dear listeners and viewers, the EU takes decisions by majority vote on majority of the situations. Only sometimes there is a consensus necessary.
Do you think that the European leaders actually have the capacity to convince the Belgian Prime Minister, who actually holds a very key position in the discussions?
I think they have the capacity to convince Bart de Wever, the Belgian Prime Minister, on this issue. There were not only talks between the Belgians and the European Commission, but there were also meetings between Bart de Wever with the German Chancellor, for example, to look for ways to mitigate the pressures. Because the Belgian argument at the end of the day is that Belgium, as a small country, 10 million people or 11 million people, is too much exposed financially vis-a-vis the potential threats coming from Russia when we talk about frozen assets. So it is about mitigating that threat, and it is about how the other European nations can step in and help the Belgians in this matter. So there's clearly a room for maneuver, but whether those discussions will be successful, well, the Europeans have put themselves a deadline for this. This is the European Council in about 10 days.
Exactly. So there's very limited time. So do you think it's actually realistic?
10 days is an era in politics. You can clearly say that if you look at the world 10 days ago and today. So let's leave it as it is. Be optimistic if you're an optimist, and be pessimistic if you're a pessimist. Realists out there need to work for the for the breakthrough. And you just started with a new letter of multiple governments who are supportive of using it, this instrument, and they are pushing for it to happen. So it's not only that it's von der Leyen versus Bart de Wever in this discussions, but she has a major backing of some major players.
Now I want to move on to the Polish-Ukrainian relationship. It looks like President Zelensky and Polish President Nawrocki may meet in the near future. When might that be? Where might it be? And what for? Will it be of strategic significance? We also have some words from President Zelensky. He says, "I would be happy to meet with him. I told him that over the phone. I invited him and said, please choose any date. We respect Poland and we are grateful to Poland for sheltering our people, for helping and supporting us. We are always open. We have many possible dates. Choose any date and I will gladly meet with the new president of Poland, Mr. Nawrocki." So do you have any details that you might be able to share with us?
I do not work for the Polish Chancellery, for Polish Presidential Chancellery, but President Nawrocki has been positioning himself as an anti-Ukrainian president of Poland. So I hope that once he meets President Zelensky, he will not play the anti-Ukrainian card, but a good neighborly card, the card that was played by his predecessor, Andrzej Duda, who was coming from the same political circles as Mr. Nawrocki. So times have changed, and there's many more anti-Ukrainian feelings that President Nawrocki tries to capitalize on, and that is regretful. Hopefully, when time comes and there's a test for President Nawrocki, he will deliver, because this is in Polish interest to have a good neighborly relations with Ukraine and address all the outstanding issues out there. They may be of historical nature or they can be of contemporary nature, but they simply have to be addressed as they are.
And now, one of the top stories in the EU this week is the Migration and Asylum Pact that has been a point of contention and heated discussion for a long time, but now it has been signed off. So what can we expect to see happen and how quickly?
So the Migration Pact is taking effect in June. I think it is June 12th, to be precise, 2026. And from then, the new regime will enter into force. And then we'll see how this truly plays out in reality, because we have had so many hopes out there and narratives that we kind of lost the reason why this Migration Pact is there in the first place. So pacts are very important. First, there's 21,000 people that have been identified as people who need to be relocated around Europe. They are excessive number of migrants coming to countries of Southern Europe, especially Greece, Spain, Cyprus, and those countries will be, so to speak, sending migrants, if you like. And then there are countries that are under migratory pressure, including Poland. That means that they are exempt for 1 year from the obligation to receive migrants or contribute financially or in kind for those migrants, for this 21,000 people overall. But we talk about a small group of 21,000 people. Compare it with about 1 million or over 1 million only Ukrainians who are now in Poland. But there's a really interesting quote from a Danish minister, Denmark having the presidency of the Council of the EU right now, after yesterday's Justice and Home Affairs Council, where he said that there's no room for illegal migrants in Europe. So it's kind of quoting Donald Tusk out there.
Okay. We were joined by Piotr Kaczyński from the European Institute of Public Administration. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap for World Talks. Thanks so much for joining us, and stay tuned for much more on TVP World. Goodbye.